Hi, this is Doug Bear with Splunk. I've got to tell you, the Big Data Beard podcast, with a name like that, how can you not listen?
You are now listening to the Big Data Beard.
This is our podcast where we explore the trends, technology, and talented people making big data a big deal.
A 1 year review. I like it. I like it a lot.
Yeah, well, it's funny because like 1 year ago, it was everything was just, let's still talk about big data, and AI and machine learning was just barely starting to enter the...
We can come on to it in a minute, but we did some really interesting stuff back in 2015. And I did a presentation which was basically titled, like, it was the 2020 sort of research group in Arrow. And we basically were looking 5 years out. And I did a presentation on big data. And I said, you know, I think the reality is that by 2020, we might start to see machine learning and things come in. Because back then, it really was a preserve of universities and governments and all that sort of stuff. And then literally, I was completely blown out the water, which I'm pleased about.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? I think I'm someone who's very happy to say I was totally wrong. But yeah, literally you were looking at this sort of this evolution of machine learning and then into sort of deep learning and now into sort of very specific sort of domain specific AI.
Yeah.
And we've just seen that just go absolutely hyperscale. It's incredible.
Crazy. It's fun to watch. So we are finally back at Conf this year. 1 year later, David is joining
exactly
us.
1 year.
David is the global business intelligence and data analytics lead for Arrow.
Yes.
And we're excited to have you. Are the first person to ever come on the show
I'm
2 times.
So impressed. I'm
well,
so happy.
We were so impressed last time. We thought, hey, we got to do it again.
No, fantastic. I'm more than happy to be back on.
Excellent. Well, thanks for joining us. So I want to start because we talked about that AI has just come on as this trend, right? It's just this crazy thing. But one of the things that we see is there's challenges and there's varying states of adoption and maturity in AI. I'm curious, just at a high level, what's your perspective on the current state of AI in the enterprise?
So I would probably say there's a couple of different purposes for people looking into AI. The first is exploration, right? Where you've got a question you need to answer, and you think machine learning, AI, deep learning is probably the answer to the equation, right? And you want to create a visualization or you want to create an answer. Great. That's one use case. But the other distinct use case is where actually you want to deploy AI to do a task every day, right? And in that situation, you deploy it as a model, and then you essentially deploy it as an API to go and do a task. We're seeing the first use case is actually probably it's being used, but actually what we're seeing more of in the enterprise is these sort of very specific neural nets and very specific machine learning models to essentially automate processes. So, you know, we find a lot of customers, and there's a type of technology, the robotic sort of automation, you know, that whole field, where actually if you plug in the ability to just do repetitive tasks with a simple little bit of AI, you can really streamline a process, and you can, you know, move your employees up the value chain to get them doing more valuable things rather than literally being a very expensive copy and paste or a very expensive sort of API. You can start to get them to, you know, you can start to move them into roles where they can do much more intelligent stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because we see that too, right? That it absolutely is automation on steroids, right? And I think that's the nearest term kind of thing. But I'm curious though, because on the flip side of it, there are people out there, you know, the most visible reference would be somebody like an Elon Musk, right? Who's a fearmonger around AI. So I'm curious, from your perspective, with what you know, do you think that the fear of AI, at least today, do you think it's well-founded?
No. I would personally say that you're talking to one of the biggest fans of Mr. Musk going, right? He is an absolute legend in my eyes. But you know what? It wasn't just him. You know, you had Stephen Hawkins, you know, RIP. He was also another big proponent of AI is one of the most terrifying things that could ever happen. Mm-hmm. Now, what I find interesting is their sort of vision, and it's, you know, Elon Musk has more recently taken quite a fatalistic attitude on AI. Sort of, he's tried, but he's failed to sort of warn the world. But I honestly think that actually the reality of the so-called singularity or this super intelligence is it's way off. Yeah. It's way off. But then so the flip side of that is, what's the first thing that a super intelligent AI would do? So if you were in a situation where you felt threatened,
Yeah.
and you'd woken back up and you felt threatened, the first thing you'd do is you'd hide or you'd play dumb. So what's the first thing a superintelligence would do? It would hide and escape and evade us realizing it was a superintelligence. So who's to say that it doesn't already exist and it's on the internet, traveling around, hiding itself, causing mayhem,
Replicating itself.
Yeah, pretending to be the Russians or the Chinese, hacking into stuff. So
I'm not going to sleep tonight now. Thanks.
So yeah,
that.
that's the reality. That's the reality. Of the situation.
that is a crazy perspective. So, and one of the things that I think that highlights though is that whatever we build is going to be a mirror image of us. I think at some level, and that's what concerns me a bit. So, one of the things that we're also seeing a big response from government agencies and from civil rights groups like the ACLU, right? They published recently that they did this test where they were using Amazon's facial recognition solution, and they used the pictures of congressmen, and it misidentified them as wanted criminals, and it was actually had some racial biases to it.
Look, so
are you concerned about biases? Like, how concerned should we be?
Well, we should be very, very concerned because. So it's really interesting. I was listening to another podcast recently, and they were talking about, these biases that come into training data sets. And they were saying, well, the reality is most of these training data sets are made by one person. Mm-hmm. And then, so for example, they're developed in San Francisco or they're developed in Israel or somewhere like that, where there is one very distinct type of person. The majority of people that they're using to train the data sets are white, male, Caucasians, and that's it. So actually, the ability to then go and look at other sort of skin colors and other sort of demographics becomes very difficult. And there's a huge problem at the moment with sort of good quality training data sets. And I suppose it brings us on later to sort of training data set versus optimized algorithm and what's more important. And I think for me it's clearly obvious, but I think a lot of people, it's not. The problem is not the people who are writing the algorithm. It's the people who are building the training data sets to actually train the algorithms. They're not. I think at the moment we're in a real infancy of this sort of technology, and I think we need better quality and better investments in building out much wider, much more sort of capable data sets. But, that's not sexy and cool. Building algorithms is sexy and cool. Building, platforms like the ones we were just looking at are sexy and cool. Not building training data sets.
Right. But that's really where the investment in training needs to be. And by training, I mean actually having people that are capable of doing that, finding what the right data sets are, and then also being able to translate that to being able to run it to those sexy algorithms. Do you really see that as being the future of where the gaps are right now?
Oh, absolutely. So, I mean, obviously we work with the channel, with partners, and every single conversation I had at the start of this year about AI was, don't worry about getting deep into the algorithms. Don't worry about getting into, work in your area and become a data as a service partner. Literally go and build really highly sort of tagged and highly sort of, highly contextual training data sets and sell them to the end customers you work with. Because I guarantee if you work in insurance, if you work in construction, if you work in public sector, there will be demand for really highly sort of specialized training data sets. You can sell them as a service. You can experiment with building synthetic data sets. I said that is where you should be spending your time because it's not something that's very well taken care of at the moment.
Yeah, So I think I'll challenge you a little bit though, because my concern is, in order for an organization to make a business out of selling data, there almost has to be the infrastructure that is the basis of that company's revenue stream anyway. Like it's very hard to pivot, and it's like you can go back to like Adam Smith's economics. It's like it's either transfer goods or you use them. And I think that organizations, the ones that are going to leverage AI and machine learning most effectively today, are the ones that are going to use the data they have versus. Like the only companies I see actually selling data effectively are like companies like that's how they've made money for it.
Nielsen.
Exactly. Nielsen. Like we had on the show, we had this organization on that's a Verisk analytics company called Power Advocate. And their business model as a whole was basically providing access to these curated data sets to help people have an outcome. So I agree with that.
So you'll be pleased to know I'm going to challenge you back.
I like it, please.
Because if we look at analytics, right, if you look at the people you've just described,
Right.
they are essentially the top level of the solution vertical, right? Whereas actually where the real value today in analytics is in the sub-vertical of the sub-vertical of the sub-vertical. And I'll give you an example, right?
Okay.
So let's take building and construction, okay?
Yeah.
There is lots of data providers that provide information on the location that a construction company should pick or should use to try and pick
Right.
for their next thing they're going to build, right?
Right.
Great. But where's the data to help the safety officers inside of the building company, specifically inside of building a specific house? It doesn't exist, right? And the reality is that that's a big use case for AI and machine learning, because if you can essentially help to automate and sort of predict where failures in buildings might occur on a specific type of build of a specific type of property in a specific type of location, a subvertical of a subvertical of a subvertical, that's where value can genuinely be gleaned on the field today. And that's what we say, don't look for these sort of big, massive use cases, because the reality is that back in the day, you could only do so much with data because you only had so much physical human being resource. AI allows you to do super finite, amazingly cool little things and do them once and then leave them to run for the rest of their lives. I mean, don't get me wrong, they'll do, AI networks will degrade over time, but that's really, really powerful. So think about the subvertical of the subvertical of the subvertical, not the, it's not literally the top level thing. Actually, there's lots of, everything breaks down into, and the outcome for one person, it can be very, very different to the outcome of another.
Well, I think where there's value is having that intermediary between the collection of the data, the people that actually create the data, and then the using of the data. If there's we talked about democratizing machine learning and all of that on the algorithm side, but what about democratizing data cleansing and actually providing that middleman to take the data from whatever source that another company produces and then create those data sets as a business for themselves? I think that's the
100%.
compromise right there.
I think normalization of data, so one of the single biggest limiting factors we've seen to essentially any sort of large scale AI is human beings are really, really terrible at dimensionality, right? As soon as you start to go from one data source to another data source, another data source, they've got different time series. They need normalization. They need, and we are really rubbish at looking at one data set that's based on like meters, one data set that's based on time, one data set that's based on, number of people. Our heads just really, our heads just explode.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we normalize it so that essentially when we feed it into a machine learning algorithm, we turn around and go, here's the normalized data set. And there's AI algorithms to do the normalization. But I think that's one of the biggest problems with what you've just described. And actually doing that as a service, becoming a specialist in creating normalized dimensional data sets. Dimension, for those of you who are scratching heads, but dimension is just the number of different diverse data sources you're trying to use to answer a question. And at this point, we always talk about, dimensionality is the definition of what big data is all about. Big data is not about, and I'm pretty sure I said this a year ago as well, but I'll say it again. Big data is not about the number of bits of data you've got. Because if all you've got is sales data based on selling a product, based on the money you've brought in, the only answer you're going to get is about that one thing and about the money. Actually, what might be affecting your sales might be customer services. It might be, your social impact. It might be, how you're perceived in different forums on the internet, on Twitter, or on Facebook, on whatever. Unless you process those different dimensions of your business, you can't possibly hope to answer and get any level of impact.
So the dimensionality thing, though, I think is one where I agree with you, and I actually think that's why I'm personally kind of excited about a trend that I'm starting to see. And when we saw it this week in the announcements made by the team at Splunk around bringing more machine learning capabilities, Machine Learning Toolkit 4.0 getting announced.
Yeah.
Because Splunk already has a common data model that has defined dimensions that they, in their indexing pipeline, that's what they do is create that organization structure. And actually, if you look at what happened last week, Microsoft and Adobe and SAP came out and announced we're going to have a common data model to make it simpler for organizations to leverage the data being created by applications to advanced AI and machine learning. And I think they're admitting by their actions that you're exactly right.
Yeah, and then this is the thing, and I think actually it's a very underestimated skill to take multidimensional data and turn it into something that you can then utilize in any sort of way, shape, or form. But yeah, we'll get there. We'll get there. And the tools will get there, and there are a lot of good tools. I know that Google worked really, have sort of embedded one now into their cloud platform. I forget what it's called now, but it's a really slick tool for doing data wrangling and normalization. So we'll get there. We'll get there.
So I want to talk about the role, because you deal with a lot of folks who are trying to achieve value with data science and AI. But I'm curious, because I feel like when I look at the market and I hear from organizations that are trying to achieve success here, I feel like the role of the data scientist is changing. What do you think is the role of the data scientist, if you want to use your 5 years out term? Like, over the next 5 years, what does the role of the data scientist look like?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm going to break it down into not necessarily the role of the data scientist, but the role that data will play in the business. And actually then from there, where do we need investment in skills, right? So data scientists first and foremost, let's define a data scientist, because I think very much like big data and AI, everyone has their own definition. To me, a data scientist is someone who is super clever, almost like we call them quantitative analysis. It's called a common term in the financial world, but they're the mathematician, right? They're the person that understands how to go from A to B to C. Now, we needed that when we were writing like Python applications to do this, right? We needed that when we were using MATLAB and MLlib and all that sort of stuff, where it was proper complicated and you were tuning hyperparameters in freaking abundances of code and all that sort of stuff. Now, the reality is that today's tool sets give you essentially, there's AI to actually do data science. So the data scientists have essentially done themselves out of a job, because their job by the very nature was a logical, mathematics-based problem, right? Right. Well, you can essentially imply AI to do data science.
Right.
So the data scientists have fundamentally done themselves out of a job. And then add to that the fact that, in my personal opinion, and in a lot of research we've seen from some of the major organizations, you get a certain percentage increase from spending loads of time and investing a lot of money in a very, very highly skilled data scientist to tune hyperparameters, tune the sort of hidden layers of a neural network or whatever you want to do. But you get double-digit percentage accuracy increases from having a much better understood, much better sort of appropriate data set and having it better tagged, having domain experts develop it, not have a data scientist sit there and go, but I could retune the algorithm to this. So to answer your question in a very roundabout way, the value to an organization is going to be in having domain experts develop really, really super highly refined data sets. It comes right back to what I was saying earlier on, right? Super highly refined data sets, and also finding data and not trying to develop something that is a catch-all, answer-all, fix-all network, developing something that is a, as I said, subvertical of a subvertical of a subvertical. And, we use a really simple term, right? The riches are in the niches. Okay.
The what?
The riches are in the niches.
Okay.
Niches, riches, niches. I don't know.
Okay.
But the idea being that if you can find something that is quite specialist, create a really cool training data set for it, and apply it, and fix a problem, and then fix 10 problems, you'll have a much better experience with AI and data science, and you'll actually see real, genuine business value than you would have if you tried to fix like a massive problem that was really high level. It might be sexy, but the value to the business will be exponentially greater.
Yeah, and I always think math is still important. You still need to have that background, but de-emphasize that a little bit and actually have more of like a program management background, almost, where you are interviewing and going to the right people that know what are the right data sets. So do you think as organizations change curriculum or education kind of places more of a focus on other skill sets, like what do you think those other skill sets are?
The skill sets are, so for me, actually, one of the biggest skill sets is still going to be scientific, but it's not going to be data science. It's going to be almost creating accurate, So when you go and collect data as a scientist, right, you need to make sure that the data you're collecting is consistent, it's sort of statistically sound, it's, you know, it's well distributed, it's got a good, you know, common frequency of sampling. All those sorts of things are really important in science, and that's why we have accurate results in science. To the point you made earlier on about, are we worried about bias in AI? Absolutely we are, because at the moment the data sets that are being developed to train AI are being developed by people who are coders. They're not scientifically able to go and understand what attributes are important to create training data sets. So I actually see going forward, if we want to rid the world of racist AI and an AI that is, you know, let's boil it right down, fundamentally inaccurate and not doing a good enough job of what we've tried to imply it to do, we need to have people who are scientifically trained in collecting data, and scientifically trained not in processing the data, but understanding how to collect a training data set that could prove, like, essentially could be sort of used in scientific surveys, you know.
Yeah. So it's the sad thing is 80%, and even I think this holds true still today, 80% of the job of a data science team, not just data scientists, but the team, is actually that curation, collection, and wrangling of data into useful data sets, like you said. So I think that I like the fact that, yes, we've got some, like as you said, you've got AI that's actually automating the algorithm development. I'm excited to see the developments of using AI to more effectively curate data sets for us.
Yeah, and so if I couldn't agree more, and I think that is, I mean, I've seen some solutions; they're pretty amateur at the moment. But on a serious note, that will be something that comes along super soon, and when it does, the only thing the AI is not going to be able to do is collect the data for you. Yeah. That's going to be the only thing left for the human being, which is good, right? Because it means, because the other thing we shouldn't see this as AI is going to take over. We should see this as AI is going to become a lot more relevant. You know, I always bring it back to a really simple example like virtualization, right? Virtualization existed way before VMware, but VMware made it 3-click simple, right? And when you make something 3-click simple, you democratize access to it. And when you democratize access to it, everyone goes, freaking awesome. Let's go. Let's use it. Let's literally spin up our entire infrastructure on this because it's so simple. It takes away all the thinking. You know, do people want to be sitting there, you know, writing the underlying relationship between, you know, a para-virtualized processor and the... No, of course they don't.
No, nobody wants that. It's not
value add. No one wants
add.
to do that. It's not value add. It's not revenue-generating activities. It's complete waste of your time if someone can highly automate it. AI is going to go the same way. I look forward to the day, so maybe, you know, 365 days into the future, I really hope we come back and we say, yep, that happened, and now we've got AI network sprawl. You know how we had VM sprawl?
Oh, yeah.
The first days of VMware where everyone was like, bang, 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 you'd have thousands of VMs and it was a complete mess.
Yeah.
I want to see that exact same thing happen in AI. All right? I want to see AI sprawl.
We do learn something from the trouble we create every now and then, don't we?
Not
So for
very
your
well.
third time on, we'll come back and see if that's going to happen or not.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So I want to find out what you're doing, what you're working on with Arrow, because Arrow obviously is for those that don't know, giant company, a lot of
Fortune,
different sort of unique businesses.
Fortune 130, well, as our CEO likes to say, with the Fortune 113.
Yeah. Perfect.
So yeah, 130 biggest company in the world. Yeah, we're an interesting organization. So we're doing some really cool stuff at the moment. So we've got a couple of projects. So we're a big IBM partner. And every year IBM have something they call the Watson Build Challenge, which is their global AI hackathon. So we're entered into that, and we've got a really cool project around dementia and around sort of trying to further the understanding and the research into dementia, managing of people living with dementia, as in managing their own sort of, because it is a degenerative disease, and it is something that is a slope into eventual death, sadly. But we're sort of essentially trying to develop a piece of technology that will help to further the research. And fundamentally, you know, preaching what I'm sort of talking about, the whole purpose of our project is to create a much better quality, much higher frequency, scientifically accurate training data set for research organizations to essentially use to train AI models to try and predict and provide personalized healthcare for people living with dementia.
Brilliant.
So that's one of our projects. We're doing a few cool things in retail. So working with our components business. So we have a huge, basically the sort of about half of our whole business is made up of our what we call global components, which is our semiconductor design, manufacturing, and sort of discrete component business. We're working with them to do AI at the edge.
Okay.
So we're very, very deep involved with NVIDIA, but not just NVIDIA in the data center,
Right.
but actually NVIDIA at the edge.
Okay.
So using GPUs in security cameras and GPUs in sensor packs to essentially do a huge amount of the processing at the edge. So I'll give you a cracking example, right?
Okay.
And this is good for two reasons. So first and foremost, we've got a solution with Qualcomm, NVIDIA, and it's basically all about doing image processing at the camera.
Okay.
So first and foremost, you do that because, you know, if you're trying to send a video stream back to a server to do processing, you've got to have some pretty serious pipe to get anything like HD.
Absolutely.
And actually, more often than not, you end up doing a lot lower resolution and at a lot, quite a sort of
the frame rates have to go
frame
lower.
rate,
Yeah, everything.
precisely,
Yeah.
a really sort of staggered frame rate. What we can do by putting actually the AI model at the edge, by the way, no different to what's on your phone when you use Snapchat filter or anything else.
Yeah.
We can essentially do all of the processing of you at the edge. Now, why would you do this, right? So, retail situation. I am, a shopper. I'm a man. I don't really like it when, shop assistants come and ask me stupid questions like, "Having a good day? What are you looking for?"
Yeah.
I'm like, "Leave me alone," and I just want to try some stuff on, right?
Okay.
But I'm not really helping them to refine their shop layout. I'm not really helping them to refine a lot of things. So imagine if you could build a tiny little miniature hidden camera into the mirror in the on the shop floor. When I go and pick that sports jacket up and try it on, I'm either going to stand there for a few seconds and smile and go, "Oh, I like that,"
Yeah.
and then take it to the till, or I'm going to put it on and go, "I'm not sure about this."
Yeah.
And my facial expression is just so telling.
Absolutely.
So imagine if we could literally, in real time, collect, you are a white male, roughly this demographic, roughly this age range, you tried on this particular piece of clothing and you didn't like it.
Yeah.
Immediately we could feed that information to essentially a dashboard that sits behind the till that informs the shop assistants that actually we've had 10 people who are this particular demographic, this particular age range, and they all didn't like this jacket. Feed that back to, or more importantly, we've had 10 people in who all really like this jacket, but they didn't actually buy. Next time you see someone in, go and talk to them. So you can essentially give them real-time information.
Right.
The other reason why we really like the solution, so other than obviously we can help to really inform the shop assistants in real time and give them infinitely more data points other than just, because you've got to think, right, the only data point that a store gets is what was bought through the till.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? It doesn't tell the
Point of
story about why you had 100 people in and only 10 people bought stuff.
Yeah.
This helps to answer that story. But obviously, over in Europe, we have this little thing called GDPR,
Never heard of her.
right? And essentially, and I'm sure there's loads of people sitting there right now going, "You're literally going to film me trying on a jacket, figure out whether or not I'm happy or sad. Yeah, good luck."
Yeah.
Hold on. If I'm actually destroying the image of your face, that piece of personally identifiable data, at the camera, I'm storing it for milliseconds.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm completely disregarding it. And what I'm sending back is totally anonymized data based on, an AI model that's looking at your face to say,
It's a
"Are you
pixel
this
matrix.
old?" Exactly. I'm sending back matrix. I'm sending back a tensor.
Yeah.
I'm not sending back your picture.
Yeah.
I'm not telling the shop assistant who you are and that you're unhappy.
Right.
I'm simply giving the shop a whole bunch more data. So we can essentially bypass GDPR with it as well.
So you're shrinking the amount of data that you have to send across the pipe because you're not sending full video.
Yes.
You're moving the process to the edge, and you're obfuscating any of that personal identifiable information. But then you could also, ostensibly, that's like you could run a distributed neural network where you're running a couple of nodes at the edge, and then you're bringing the rest of that data back to continue to run in a data center
Precisely.
somewhere.
But the most important thing is we're giving a insight into a shopping experience, an insight into a bunch of people who, to be quite frank, you would have otherwise never got. And you can re-optimize the shop layout. You can help the shop assistants to be more effective in their conversations and say, "Oh, you know what? You might not like that jacket, but I tell you what, we've had 10 people who have come in and really like this jacket, and they didn't or they didn't buy it, or you can help to look out. It's about being more data driven.
Absolutely.
In every single way and every single part of your life. So yeah, that's a really interesting use case that we've been developing now with a few different other providers.
That's very cool because I see that. I mean, IoT, AI, machine learning, all of this at the edge, right? These are buzzy words. So I want to pick your brain on what other buzzy things should we be like watching right now, because we're gonna come back in a year. We're gonna see some things happen. You're 5 years out. Probably is gonna happen in the next 2 years.
Yep.
So what are the big macro trends in technology that you're watching right now that are maybe not here today, but that we're gonna see emerge in the next couple of years?
Okay, so I think one of the spaces we've seen a lot of people talking about is AR.
Mm-hmm.
I think AR is going to be a big one. Not necessarily fully automated AR, as I think everyone was expecting.
You don't think we're going to have Ready Player One like happening here?
I would. Right, let me digress slightly. I did something last night that was the closest to a holodeck I have ever experienced in all my life. So there is an experience in Disneyland somewhere.
Disney Springs?
Yes. The Void.
Yes.
The Star Trek thing.
Yes.
Or
Sorry, Star Wars.
Yep.
Is that awesome?
Oh my God.
I know.
That was mind-blowing.
We did it twice last time we were here. I've done it once since I've been here this week.
It's just
It's
insane.
It's incredible.
And it literally is as close, in my opinion, it's as close to a holodeck on Star Wars as it's ever going to get.
Absolutely.
Well, right now, that is possibly the single best use case I've ever had for VR. Brilliant.
It's not just visual though; it's smell.
Yeah,
and
smell, heat.
Yep.
Yeah.
The pack on your body was
Yeah.
sort of
Haptic response.
it was absolutely
Yeah.
fantastic. But the reality is, VR for me today is still a bit gimmicky. That is wicked.
That's wicked cool, but AR is not quite there though.
AR's not there, but here's the thing. So we're working with a couple of providers of smart helmets.
Okay.
Now, I don't really think there's going to be a day when we're going to see smart helmets that literally guide you how to do things. I mean, maybe there will be in the future, but I really don't think that that's the future. What I think, though, is if you've got a remote worker, so imagine if you've got someone on an oil rig or someone, you could have one person, one specialist in that particular piece of equipment sitting back in an office, and then someone who was a much cheaper individual sitting in being on the oil rig with the AR helmet on. And literally the really expensive individual could sit there and guide through essentially instructions on the screen,
Right.
and in real time using sort of, this is what I need you to turn. Not that, but literally overlaying on top of that person, this is the valve you need to turn. You need to turn it this much. And literally as you turn it, it tells you exactly how far you've got to turn it. And then as soon as that work is finished, the really expensive engineer is then dialed into a AR helmet on another oil rig and another. And I see it as a way to essentially enable low-skilled workers to do super high-skilled things, but with the support in the back end of a human being. So AR, I think that there's some genuine future there.
Yeah.
I think if we switch up from what do I see for good and move on to what do I see for evil,
Okay. I like this.
I think we're going to start to see a rise. So obviously we've seen some pretty horrible viruses, securities. We've seen a lot of crypto locker and all that crazy stuff happen over the last 12 months. I think the next big thing is going to be offensive AI. So
The one that's already self-replicating itself and not hiding from us?
I guarantee that there is AI malware sort of botnets out there today that are using AI in an offensive way. So the reality is,
Okay.
AI, we all talk about how AI is being used for good, but the reality is, why won't you just turn it on its head? And instead of using AI to protect you as a user, use it to learn you and then fool the systems that are essentially trying to, figure you out.
Absolutely.
Or to
all the
essentially
adaptive authentications and all the things we have in place.
The
How do you get
reality
around
is
them?
you could use like a self-learning AI network. What are they called? They're anyway, you could basically use one of these AI networks that essentially adversarial neural networks. You could use an adversarial neural network to essentially fight you or essentially learn. You could do it in an unsupervised way, so it could just get there, and literally it's prize in an unsupervised world could be, privileged authentic or privileged escalation, and it could literally just sit there and in 24 hours figure out all your passwords, figure out how to move around your system, how to, move past even some of the most advanced platforms today. We use this sort of network baselining AI today to try and sort of understand when things that are not normal are happening. Well, this AI will just learn what's normal.
Absolutely.
And then work
Operate
within those. So that's really terrifying.
But yet you said there's no fear of AI earlier. That sounds pretty.
There's no
fearful.
fear of the super intelligence or the singularity.
Okay.
There is a lot of there will be a lot of bad actors using AI to make even more sort of vicious and nasty stuff. I mean, and then obviously, if you're talking about vicious and nasty stuff, we can then obviously move on to things like the Google conversation bot that booked a hair appointment for someone recently and phoned up, and why that's essentially sort of the scam artist's gold, because you haven't got to have human beings in some foreign country, in some massive sort of dodgy call center, banging the phones. You have a couple of servers on Amazon, and they literally just do all this for you and dial up and do the
ask the questions that are
natural
breaches,
conversation and the pauses in conversation and everything else. So that's pretty terrifying.
Actually, one I saw recently that was a much lower tech version of messing with AI is for autonomous cars. How people are doing things like camouflage on stop signs and speed limit signs, where mild changes like a piece of black tape in the wrong place can cause the AI in a car to completely miss a stop sign. And we're going to see, I think there's going to be some that low tech attack on these systems that are completely automated.
Yeah, and actually you're absolutely right. And, I think we can see that, we'll see that in a lot of the face visual recognition type stuff, in a lot of the sort of automatic systems that go around counting and sort of understanding the world around us. Vision. So I must admit, we've had a big investigation recently. So obviously, IoT being a classic example of something that's sort of on the up and up at the moment. That's been using sensors. It's been using, deploying bits of technology all around. But for anything where you're looking for like a physical context, as in a movement or a vision, technologies have come along so much recently, and actually you're tapping into an existing IoT network you've got today, which is CCTV, right? So all you got to do is essentially tap the feed and send it off to your AI, and you could use like YOLO, which is the you only look once algorithm to do complete classification. So IoT is going to be an interesting one, moving into real visual recognition. But then, as you say, if you can bust it, then it's a nightmare as well.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it's a lot of cool stuff coming down the line. And obviously, for me, I think as we're now at a point where CPU has become so miniaturized, we've got they fundamentally don't work anymore because they're so small that the electrons that they're trying to route round the transistors just go straight through them. So are we going to see more investment and more time into the Q word? Old quantum computing, and maybe that'll become something we see next year. IBM have released Q series, so that's their own commercial sort of quantum computing range. So who knows? That might be something we see next year as well.
It's going to be fun to watch. Well, David, it's been fun to chat with you, catch up on trends, what we're seeing at the conference, why we should, and what parts of AI we should be afraid of. But I want to switch gears, and I want to go back, and we'll try these rapid fire questions again, see if anything's changed. So what year do you think Skynet will go online?
Right, so I'm going to go with 2025.
2025. All right. What is the last great book that you've read?
I have just finished reading The Subtle Art of Not Giving a...
Yes.
That is a great book.
It is quite
really
intriguing.
Good book.
Yeah.
What genre of music are you rocking these days?
I'm still a bit of a sad sort of garage and dance man. So what can I say?
It's not as melancholy as you make it sound.
No.
What piece of technology is currently making your life worse?
Oh, that's a great question. I would... Do you know what? I must admit, I think I've made some good selections recently in technology. I've put a lot of smart home stuff into my house recently, and not one bit of it is actually causing me an issue. So
that's good.
I'm going to go as far as to say I'm pretty happy at the moment. But that's a good question.
That's
I
incredible.
will come up with a better answer next time.
I'm jealous. My smart home is completely broken right now. So
I've kept
Nothing
it
works.
very simple, and I've got a bunch of girls I live with, as in my daughters and my other half, and they're really getting on with it.
Are they? Okay.
Yeah, so I'm
That's
happy.
fun.
I'm happy.
They haven't started. Your daughters haven't used Alexa to make unintended purchases yet.
No.
Okay.
So I've locked her down. A lot of if then that rather than using the native command. So yeah, we're in a good
Absolutely.
place.
Very good. So, what is your current personal money pit right now?
I'd say probably I've just bought a brand new house.
Oh, have you? Okay.
Yeah, I literally exchanged that last week, and solicitors' costs and everything else is killing
It
me.
is
But yeah, that's
incredible.
probably it.
Are you going anywhere interesting soon?
So yes, actually next week I'm off to, appreciate this may date our conversation, but I'm actually off to Munich to go to the NVIDIA GPU Technology Conference.
Very cool.
So that'll be good.
That's good. And then if you're going to be traveling back and forth over the big oceans, you binging any TV shows right now?
So I've just finished Last Man on Earth, which I really enjoyed.
What was it called?
Last Man on Earth. It's on
Last
Amazon
Man on
Prime.
Earth. Okay,
That was
very
a really funny comedy.
All right. And so, David, where do we find you on social if we want to keep up with all your activities?
At David Fearne on Twitter.
Yeah.
To be honest, I'm not on Facebook, and that's a conversation for another day.
A question: do you think kids and like college age kids are using Facebook today?
No. So I got a 13-year-old daughter,
Uh-huh.
and she has no. I mean, don't get me wrong, she's not too early for Facebook anyway, but she has no interest. None of her friends on it. Their Snapchat,
Yeah.
their Instagram, and then there's sort of the flavor of the month.
Yeah.
So it was Musically. It's all sorts. I mean, honestly, the evolution of social platforms in sort of that 13 sort of 16
Yeah.
ridiculous. Facebook is for like her mum and I.
Yeah.
It's not for her at all.
Yeah.
yeah, my parents are on Facebook, not me. That's
Well, I mean, I'm not on Facebook because I don't really believe in a lot of the things they use data and everything else.
Yeah.
But as I said, conversation for another day. That really is a can of worms that I don't think we've got time for now.
for your third time on the show. By the way, for the third time, you get a members only jacket for being on the show 3 times. So instead
I'll
of come
hold you to
back,
that. I'll hold you to that, Brett.
and I'll hold him to pay for it.
Awesome. Well, David, thanks so much for being on
No,
with us.
you
It's
are.
welcome.
Honestly, it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. Keep up the good work, guys. And yeah, thanks very much. Speak soon.
Cheers.
Sounds
Cheers,
good.
guys.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening to the Big Data Beard podcast.
It would also be pretty cool if you reviewed us in your favorite podcast app. It really does help. Thanks for listening.